Yeah, we are live.
Okay, good afternoon, dear brothers and sisters. Namaste. Sabko pranam. We are very lucky today that we have Sister Elizabeth Denley, who, as you all know, is the co-author of Heartfulness Way, Book 2, and Brother Tushar Pradhan also, who will be in conversation with her. So I would first like to heartfully welcome each and every one of you who has joined the session, and our two guests today, Sister Elizabeth Denley. Welcome, sister, and Brother Tushar Pradhan also. This whole initiative was triggered actually by Sister Priya Seth, who is coordinating the book launch events in our region for Maharashtra and Goa. So, if you want to have any kind of book launch or book promotion in your own zone, please reach out to Priya Sister. So, Priya Sister, thank you for organizing this. And now I'll hand over the reins of the session to you. Over to you, Priya Sister.
Thank you so much, sister. Thank you for all your love and support. And a very warm welcome to each and everyone here today. Again, deeply grateful for Elizabeth and Tushar Bhai to host this for us. And really deeply grateful for both of you coming together here and maybe bringing to us Daji's inspirations, as he co-authored the book with him. And hopefully it will help us all deepen our journey as we go ahead further. And your insights will not only help us with the concepts, but maybe how we can live and experience them each day. So very joyfully looking forward to the next 1 hour. And Tushar Bhai, I hand it over to you from here.
Thank you, Sister Priya. Welcome, everyone, and welcome, Elizabeth, to our Mumbai session of the book launch. Of course, there are so many questions that I want to ask that obviously all of them are not going to be probably available for answer, but I'll structure it in a certain way so that we'll attempt to at least take a little bit out of the whole ocean that is open to us in this book. So first of all, just for everyone's information, we had a small chat before we were to begin this program, and Elizabeth asked, what kind of audience should I expect? And with a lot of confidence, I told her that, look, these are very serious seekers. We are Mumbai. In fact, in our zone alone, there will be upwards of 250 preceptors alone. So you could be assured that, the kind of audience you will get is obviously fairly serious seekers. And that's something where, the flowering of the book can come. Having said that, it doesn't mean that it is not for anyone else. Each of us can find something of great interest in the book. Depends on, how the conversation will, work around the kind of audience we get. So she was curious about that. So I've assured her on all our behalfs that we should be in for a fairly interesting, deepening kind of conversation. Having said that, let me ask Elizabeth the first question. And first of all, what is the book about? I mean, we all know it is the Heartfulness Way, Book 2, but is there a subtle reason why Daji decided to write this book now as opposed to the Heartfulness Way, Book 1? And how should we view this book now that it is presented to us?
So it all started actually pre-COVID, when one day we were sitting working on something and he said, we really need to do a book to make Babaji Saab's Reality at Dawn available to everybody, to let people know what heartfulness, what this is really all about, and what's possible on this way. Heartfulness Way, Book 1, I mean, you mentioned this, Tushar, and it was done with Joshua Pollock. And it was more about introducing the practices and the tradition to the world. But I think this time Daji wanted to take it to the next level. He wanted to go in more depth about what's really on offer. And of course, there are lots and lots of very, very deep, profound points in Reality at Dawn. you know, it's a book where when you first read it, you go, okay, yes, nice, wow. But on second reading, on third reading, on fourth reading, on 100th reading, there's still so much more to discover. And as Daji himself said when we interviewed him about the book, he said, Babaji's given us the DNA of spirituality and reality at dawn. He's taking us from our starting point now, where we're at. And that can be for a first timer, or it can be for somebody who's been practicing for 50 years. It doesn't matter. Where we are now is our current state. With all the beliefs that we have in that, all our weaknesses, all our humanity, and we're still going on a journey, no matter how long we've been doing this, to where we're going to end up, to, as Babaji says, what I should be. And so this book is about that. It's about this journey, which is encapsulated in the first quote at the beginning of the book. Philosophy is thinking, yoga is doing, and realization is undoing. We have there jnana, karma, and bhakti, the three pillars of yoga, if you like. We also have the mind, the heart, and going beyond to something else, which we can't really put in words, but we can definitely point towards as a destination, realization. So if you look at the table of contents, I don't know how many of you have had a chance to read the book, but if you look at the table of contents, this is the journey it follows. It starts with our beliefs, our starting point, where we're at. And those beliefs can be cultural, they can be familial, they can be personal. We might accept spirituality. I mean, many adepts within the Heartfulness tradition, the Sajmarg tradition, would accept spirituality. But other people may come from a religious background or a scientific background. We all have a different belief and belief structure. And with that comes prejudices. So Daji starts there. He looks at how our minds work in the light of this. And he goes back to what Babaji says in Reality at Dawn. Of course, when Babaji was writing it, the belief system was mostly religion. So his first chapter was about religion. Daji's dealing with a different world, where science dominates over religion in most cases. So he's had to include both, and the prejudice that comes with that. The prejudice of religious dogma or scientific paradigms. It's all our belief. And then he takes it further and he says, do you believe in God or have you experienced God? And then he goes beyond even that. He goes beyond the experience to where we can go with realization. The second chapter is about the journey. The third chapter is about the approach and attitudes that we need to get there. The fourth chapter is about what support and love we receive from the guide, the guru, the master, and the trainers within the Heartfulness system. The fifth chapter is about the methods and training that we have to undertake, and as well as the support we get. The sixth chapter is about building trust and faith, and where we sometimes falter with that and what to do about it, etc. And the idea of true faith, of Shraddha, which is a very high state in yoga, but it's not the end point by a long shot. And then the idea, the next chapter, chapter 7, of constant remembrance, of establishing a constant connection. And he gives us it's interesting through the book. He gives us some examples from his own journey, his own life. And this chapter is a big one because he talks about his life in New York City as a pharmacist and what happened when his first pharmacy caught on fire and he lost everything and had to start again. and the role remembrance played in that experience. So he takes us this far. He takes us along the journey and he says, these are the tools you need. You start here. This is what you're given. This is what you need to develop. And then the last 3 chapters are about the journey in a much more probably philosophical, esoteric way. He talks about the heart, the realm of emotions and qualities. And, you know, often in Sajmarg, we don't really appreciate what's going on here with the heart. We don't really appreciate what Babaji was saying, because, you know, here's a simple quote from the beginning of this chapter. He says, an evolved consciousness must manifest in our day-to-day living. And that is where the heart comes into play. In fact, if the heart-based qualities are not expressed in worldly life, the higher spiritual states will not be available to us. This is a hint that's there in Lalaji's work, it's in Babaji's work, it's in Charaji's work, it's in Daji's work, but how often do we really realize this? That unless what, you know, Daji often says, what do we do with meditation? Or what do we do with this expanded consciousness? And that's the incarnated soul, the Jivatman. This is what we come here to understand, to learn about. And how to do that, how to master the heart region, the emotions, develop things like empathy and compassion, and go from our self-focused approach to spirituality on my evolution to the we of our, and the we of not only our own families and our own communities, but the whole of humanity, the whole of life. You know, Lalaji often used to say he would pray for the soul of the world, this concept that we're all connected, that we're all one. And then finally, we then move into chapter 9, the mind region, what this is all about, what this part of the journey is all about in the higher chakras, and the fact that we're learning about Saranagati and the importance of that, what it means, and the absolute naturalness of it, the absolute freedom that comes with that it's not a chore to give up the ego. He turns it around, this idea that we have of ego and the restrictions that the ego place on us, to look at it from a slightly different perspective, which I find very refreshing and very invigorating for spiritual practice. And then finally, his last chapter is on the destination, God realization, and the center. And so this is what the book's about. I mean, it very much follows the same pattern as Reality at Dawn, but it has a lot of Daji's own anecdotes, his own understanding, if you like, of what Babaji's talking about. And he's expanding on it. He's bringing it into the modern world. And for that reason, you know, it's his homage to Babaji's first book. So it's pretty dynamic, and of course it goes much deeper. For adepts, I think it's a lot of thought-provoking stuff in here, and a lot of these little secrets that are there in Babaji that we might overlook, but Daji doesn't overlook them. He homes in on them and he expands them and he makes them exciting for us.
Yeah, in fact, that is something which I also felt when I was reading the book, that while the source of all of the knowledge is in Babuji's book, but the way one should be reading it, one should be applying it. I think Daji has really brought that out wonderfully. And I would just like to share a few of my own experiences when I was reading this. Was about on page 158 when he talks about the heart region and the concept of the C's and the D's. I initially thought that, you know, the chakras mean a turning away from the D to the C, trying to get, the better of. But it was so illuminating to know that they are always there. They are the dvandvas. They are the opposite. Can you share a little bit when you were discussing this with him and he was sharing, this CD concept? Could you tell us a little bit about that? Because that's something which I feel needs a little bit of elaboration, because at least I had a little bit of a problem understanding that concept.
I think this has evolved over time too, and it's definitely involved in our discussions, in the sense that initially it's easy to think of it as going from discontent to contentment, from restlessness and disturbance to calm at chakra 2, from displeasure, anger, hatred, etc., to love and compassion at chakra 3, from fear, discouragement, etc., to courage at chakra 4, at the water chakra, and from delusion, confusion, illusion to clarity at chakra 5. Because we all think that, we have to be attached to the so-called good qualities. And of course, we strive for that. If you follow the yamas and niyamas of Patanjali, or, the 10 maxims of Sajmarg, Babaji's 10 maxims, or the Eightfold Path of the Buddha, or the 10 Commandments of Christianity, I mean, it's all the same stuff, right? It's all about how a virtuous person, how a pure person, somebody with a pure consciousness is going to behave. But the so-called Ds, the so-called negative qualities, are there to teach us always. And, what Daji says in here too, if I can find it, is he said we can...
It's 160, I think, 160.
Where he says, yeah, okay, yeah, you're right. Samskaras are like computer viruses. They infect the chakra system and gain control over its operation. When samskaras are in control, we rely on fulfillment to experience C states. Otherwise, we remain in D states. And I think this is where most of us are at a lot of the time. We're sort of hooked on to this, going back to the belief system, which he talks about in the first chapter. We're hooked on to the pleasure of success or goodness or peace, and the pain of suffering and going through challenges. And this is a big theme throughout the book, because he says this is what limits us. Once we can free ourselves of that, once we see challenges as something for our own growth, if you look at the maxims, Babaji spelling it out there. Look at Maxim 7. He's telling us how to do all this stuff. But what he says is that fulfillment based on external circumstances is not lasting, whereas in true fulfillment, we rest in a state of lightness where there is only minimal oscillation between C's and D's. It is a state of balance, like the ever-narrowing arc of a pendulum that gradually comes to rest at the center of its trajectory. In this state of balance, we transcend the swing of opposites, which becomes so minimal that the opposites remain unexpressed. They exist, yet they are dormant. They can still manifest, and they do surface at special moments according to need. One reason they surface is to guide us by encouraging us or warning us. So C's encourage us, D's warn us. We all know from the book Anger to Love, From Anger to Love, that anger has a purpose, and Babaji says it's a divine emotion. Krodha is a divine emotion. It's not something that we can get rid of. It's there as a guidance, an inner radar that tells me something's not right here. Same with fear. Fear, as Lalaji says in his letters, is a caution. And God-given fear has a real purpose. Otherwise, the easily go out into some state of arrogance, because we wouldn't develop the humility that we need to. Same with, all the multi emotions associated with chakra 1. Envy, worry, jealousy, lust, guilt, shame, all these things that we consider that we just want to get rid of them. When we learn instead to work with them, when we work with the Ds, so that we can say, what's going on here? I mean, ideally, I was just reading something today in one of the old preceptors' guides where Charaji's quoting Babaji, and Babaji says, when you give a sitting, if you really do the work well in an individual sitting, you won't have to do any counseling at all to the person who's come for the sitting. And I thought about it and I thought, wow, this is a high state where no talking is needed, because all the work happens from the inside. And, in theory, if we just follow the practice, and again, Daji says it in the very last chapter of this book, which I'd love to read to you that page sometime during this Tushar. But, this whole notion that if we just trust the process, everything is going to unfold as it should. And that will involve some very crappy sittings and meditations where we feel the worst of ourselves. And the Ds come out and we have to deal with that. And in dealing with it, in working with it, in becoming stronger in ourselves and acknowledging with humility, yes, this is what I am. This is a weakness in me, or this is an idiosyncrasy in me, or this is something that I can refine, or this is a challenge that I need to solve in some way. If we have this attitude, the Ds become also just as much a part of our evolution, because they're what guide us. They're the signposts that say, okay, here's your next challenge. Here's the next thing to work on. So welcome them in the same way you welcome the Cs.
Wonderful. In fact, that's something which struck me, and I thought, you would be the best person to bring that out, because typically we tend to move from the D to C to think that we've mastered, that point or something like that. That was a general understanding, at least I had. And here we are, and you speak about it so well about the Ds, but I feel that even they're a guardrail. So even when we achieve peace, you have to remember that no, that's not either the point. The point is to become less oscillating. You have to be between, this enjoyment of peace and this worry about discontentment. I mean, you have to kind of find that absolute median. And then once you are there, my understanding is that you start to become a little bit transcendent of either being happy at being peaceful and loving and all of that, and being discontented with the fact that you are not that, and that you still have envy, hate, anger, or whatever. But when you start to kind of come to the center of the point where you are not either happy because of what you achieved, but not sad because of what you're not, but use them to kind of identify what needs to be done at that time. I think that was something really amazing for me. And I think it goes on further on page 161 to be exact, is about how he says, we can identify, situations where we can use these chakras. So feeling peace in chakra 2 in any relationship, if the vibrations in chakra 3 are also not heavy, but feel as if you are melting, then you can deduce with confidence that the relationship is going to be soulful. So, he's starting to allow us to understand that whenever we are in connection with, the outside world, using the chakras to, guide you from within about what that relationship is likely to be, how do you feel about it? He's just pulling us inward and making use of these points and his chakras to kind of, allow us to kind of use this in a practical way. I had always this question that, fine, we understand the map, but how do you use them? And I think this is one of the most practical chapters that I have seen in this book, which deals with all of this in some detail.
Yeah, I also loved that when he was talking about it, because he keeps saying now, what do you do with an expanded consciousness? What do you do with meditation? What do you do with these chakras? When you become aware enough, if you're feeling something, if you are aware of your heart, and Daji often talks about how Babaji always had one eye on the heart and one eye on the outside world. So he wasn't just looking at the outside world, he was also looking at his interactions with the outside world in both directions. And, often I'm sure, as you'll also see with, we could see with Charaji, we see with Daji, they're adjusting with us, when they see something in us that needs attention, they go straight to it and they do the work. And, you don't even know it's going on necessarily, because at the same time, he'll be talking to somebody else and, reading something. I mean, multiple things are going on at the same time, but the awareness that comes with expanded consciousness, with 360-degree consciousness, if you watch a master as they're interacting with the world, you'll see, the attention is inside and out, and it is working on all these levels. So we can do that too. I had this wonderful experience. Last weekend was our national seminar here in Australia, and during the Dilse satsang that we had with Daji, I had this incredible experience, this glimpse that he gave us of such a hyper alert state of consciousness, where you could be aware of so many multiple things at the same time, not only just in this dimension, but multiple dimensions, and total alertness in all that, and still be aware of your feet on the ground and, all that sort of stuff. And I realized what state he's moving through the world in, and how for him, this whole idea of this paragraph of, while feeling this peace in chakra 2 in any relationship, if the vibrations in chakra 3 are also not heavy but feel as if you're melting, then you can deduce with confidence that this relation is going to be soulful. It doesn't have to try. It just happens. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So how do we get to that state? And it's only through practice. And, it's the same 3 practices, which is what's astounding. And that's what the last chapter is all about. It's like, what does a seed need? A seed needs water, light, and a bit of soil. What does a small seedling need? Water, light, and a bit of soil, fertilizer. What does a sapling need? Water, light, and a bit of soil. What does a huge tree need? Water, light, and a bit of soil. It's like us. It doesn't matter if you're at the beginning or in the central region, meditation, cleaning, prayer, it's the essence of everything. It's the essence of life, what our masters have given us. And, not as a chore or not as something to be done as a ritual, but something just to integrate into the daily activity. And to think that we're so lucky that we have that. I mean, it's phenomenal, really. And it's so simple. And as Daji often says, all you have to do is sit there with your eyes closed and the master does the heavy lifting. What more do you want? I mean, it's not as if we're given arduous practices, but he's given us everything we need. It's just, that's what this book is about, that it doesn't matter if you're 40, 50 years into the practice, there's still insight and new awareness and journey still to come that, is just, I mean, how can you even feel worthy of it? None of us are. We just happen to have belonged to this, thank goodness.
We were just lucky, I would think.
Yeah.
The other point I also wanted to bring out, which I also felt very strongly, was one aspect which is fairly basic, which comes in the earlier part of the book about belief, and more importantly, about science and religion. So we've been talking about this for some time, about how science eventually, has become the be all and end all for everyone to kind of say whether something is right or wrong. But in this chapter, he wonderfully brings out the fact that science can only measure. But what about things which science or scientific instruments are unable to measure? Does that mean that they don't exist? So he's wonderfully brought that out to say that neither religion, which doesn't believe in any experiment to prove anything, and it's just dogma, and the other extreme where science says that unless you prove it to me, it doesn't matter or it's not true. I think he's brought that wonderfully out to say that look beyond both. So I think that incorporates the belief spectrum where you either are from a scientific background or you're from a religious background. And I think what he's setting the stage for when we begin the book is to say that let go of both the beliefs. Try to feel this experience for yourself. And I think that is something which is very refreshing about the book, which brings me to this one question I have for you. That we all have been practicing for a long time. And, we feel that, we clearly have gone far ahead. But over time, we tend to kind of get a little bit bogged down by the routine, by the everyday nature of our meditation, and that we are not having those kind of earth-shaking experiences that the books talk about, or even the ones that we had before. So is there anything in the book to allow us to, experience this newness, this freshness again, to kind of revitalize our practice in any way? Anything that you'd like to point out to for all of us to read?
Well, I mean, for me, I guess the thing that is most awe-inspiring, I mean, there's so many bits. I was just looking at what he said about awe in the first chapter earlier today, in the section on starting point. And in fact, when you look at it, when you look at how human beings learn or become inspired, etc., or is it the basis of both science and spirituality or religion? No, I mean, I'm trained as a scientist. I worked as an ecologist. And why did I do that? Because I was in awe of nature. Most scientists are in awe of their subject matter. I'm sure if you spoke to, Niels Bohr or Einstein or any of these guys, they would have been so full of inspiration and enthusiasm about what they did. If you talk to John, if you'd spoken to John Muir, when you read his stuff about trees, it's the same way. Leonardo da Vinci didn't distinguish, whether it was about art or about science or about music or about God. It was all the same thing. Michelangelo, same thing. Everything for him was dedicated to God, but yet he used totally scientific techniques. I mean, I think we've sort of come into a world where science is it's not just about measurement. It's that our whole culture has become so materialistic. And so science along with that has become very data focused. And everything's about outcomes. And, I mean, look at the modern business world, all about it, Tushar. You work in that circle, you understand it. I mean, it's ludicrous in some ways when you look at it, that we've gone so far specializing in one direction. And yet that's what human beings do, and they use their mind to go into great detail in any direction. But what Daji reminds us of, which is very much a Babaji thing too, is, he says, one of the states we experience is awe, an overwhelming feeling of transcendence and wonder. It is a profound moment where we come across something so surreal, majestic, and limitless that all our ideas, conditioning, and frameworks dissolve. In these moments of awe, the human spirit transforms. Modern-day psychologists studying awe describe it as a spiritual, moral, and aesthetic emotion. In such transcendent moments, we have breakthroughs that propel our understanding of self and creation. And he goes on to explain how this relates to science and religion. And he says they become polarized in the modern world, but they're both useful. He says he never tries to, there's one point where he says he never tries to make them integrate. He says they each have their place in life. And he just leaves it at that and is happy bridging the two worlds. I think where this matters, though, this idea of awe, is that, like you said, sometimes we get into the humdrum, the mechanical, and we lose sight of, and it's easy to do because when you're doing something every day and it becomes habit and it's gone into your subconscious as a habit, we meditate like we clean our teeth. We just do it every day. We do our cleaning like that. And it's so much a part of our lives that excitement that we had when we first started. And, I remember sitting there, I must have driven poor Charaji mad because I'd write so much in my diary. After every cleaning, for example, I'd write what was going on. And the poor man had to read all this stuff, when I sent my diaries. And I look back now and I think, oh my goodness. But on the other hand, that enthusiasm was there because I realized here was something that worked. Here was something that was revolutionary, that psychology had never dealt with. No other spiritual system I'd ever found had dealt with. And so, that sort of, it's like a honeymoon phase in a relationship. It's just so overwhelmingly brilliant and so much experience. Of course, that can't continue because it's got to tail off and plateau into something much more subtle. So I think the thing is, do we get addicted to experience? What happens when we go beyond feelings? And it is a hard thing in a way because, when it first happens, when you start to not feel anything, or when you go into states where you think, this is not part of my, what's the word? This is not part of my reference points, from my life as to what's good or bad. We're going beyond the dualities here into the mind region. And after the surges of energy and power that we feel and, all those heady states, etc., we start to tail off into more of nothingness, more of stillness. And what happens in that? What do we do with that? And how do we sit for meditation for an hour when there's not a lot going on the surface, on the surface? But when you really look at it, it's a different way of perception, a different dimension of perception. And that's why this experience last weekend of hyper alertness was so amazing, because in this, you're experiencing the presence of that nothingness state in a totally different way, as aliveness, as soul, as life force. I don't know what to say. But my point in all this is that you can sit for sometimes weeks, sometimes months without a lot happening. But then when something like this happens, it's not that the breakthrough is suddenly, aha, wow, wonderful experience. It's much deeper than that. And it's much more profound and much more impactful. And what I find is that the further you go along, the more things open up, the more impactful it is. It's not that it ever stops or it gets boring or it becomes routine. It's just that maybe the periods are longer and you have to wait more and you have to be disciplined in nothingness, if that makes sense.
Yeah, actually, it makes a lot of sense because that's something which I have noticed not only with myself, but a lot of people who've been practicing for a long time come up with this. And I think this book is a great way to revitalize that, I feel, is because he actually brings the Ashtavakra Gita into the discussion to say, how do I know that I am realized or I'm progressing toward realization? Or how do I build these qualities in myself? And I think the answer that he gives is about developing kindness, compassion, and essentially making the focus away now from you to what the expression of what you've found out in your actions is towards others. And I think this is something which, unless we practice, we'll just keep getting confused with the silence and the inactivity within because we are not able to use that in any way.
Yeah.
Because now we maybe are not so excited about what we were in the past, or we are not so despondent about what we don't get, we kind of go into some sort of a limbo, for a lack of any other word to describe it. But we don't know what's happening, but something has happened. It's put you in this condition. And unless you start to express it in the manner in which, it can be by way of compassion or, having an honest conversation with people or just going out there, I think that's when we will start to realize. So that is what I got from that book and that chapter, to say that now it's not about you. It is about how you express what you've been given. And coming back to the question that you were, or the point you wanted to make about the Dilse conversation, when he began the discussion by saying, why do we meditate? And he brought that out so wonderfully to say that, yes, by meditation, you will probably feel less stressful, more calmer, all of those things are there. But remember what it can do. What is the potential of meditation eventually in our evolution and our progress? And that can reach you to the ultimate state. And that is something towards the later part of the book and the chapters talk about realization. That's where we are going. Could you spend a little bit of time, explaining a little bit about how, and I'll frame the question for you so it'll be easy for all of us at our level to understand, is that realization is made to be such a wonderful and ultimate thing. And it's described in so many ways, makes it quite complicated. But Babuji insists that it's simple. Daji insists that it is easy. Now, how do we kind of come to grips with, what we think is an impossible task almost? And what is the confidence that the masters have in us to say it is easy? What did you find in the book about that?
Well, the thing is that, we know, and it's in all this is in the book, and especially in the last chapter. We know that we're limited by our beliefs about what realization is. Babaji says that's why he starts with religion. And that's why we start with belief in this book, because, like you say, we all think it's some remote, some esoteric state that's so high, that's beyond our grasp, and we're just poor earthlings who are doing our best. And I would guarantee you that most Abhyasis feel that way. Very few Abhyasis come into the field thinking, okay, the masters have told me this is simple, the method's easy, let me just do it and not have any blockages or limitations. we don't see that. We don't see that amongst Abhyasis. Most people are deferring to senior preceptors, to the master, to experience as if I have none of this. Whereas what they're saying is that it's in all of us. We're not finding something new. We're just uncovering what's already there. And the way to do that is meditation, cleaning, and prayer. They keep saying again and again and again, no matter what level we're at. They also tell us that the way that, and this last chapter is, it's there in Babaji's Reality at Dawn, but Daji brings it out in a totally different way. I think Babaji expected us just to understand, where he was at. And of course, we really didn't have a hope of that. So he's really tried to make it accessible to us in a different way. So Babaji talked about the science of the center very often. And the science, he called spirituality the science of reality, and then he talked about the science of the center. And he said that, in yoga, in spirituality, from the ancient times, we had all this, this big table that's there, the sadhana chatustaya. And this is the way people looked at yoga. All these different components. I don't know, I'm sure you've seen it somewhere. It's in Yearning of the Heart, Volume 1. It's in the magazine. It's all over the place. Because this is Daji's attempt to put into a diagram format what Babaji was writing in Reality at Dawn. And when you look at it, it's overwhelming. And it must have been overwhelming for yogis going to the ashrams in ancient times and trying to do all this stuff. Because, there were 4 sadhanas. There was Viveka, Vairagya, Shatsampati, and Mumukshutta. And what does Babaji do? He says, no, we don't need all this. Let's just start with one of the Shatsampati, not all of them, just Shama. And in this, there's a couple of things. There's Abhyas and there's Vairagya, basically. So what does he do? He says, okay, in Abhyas, we have Patanjali's 8 limbs, but let's just start with meditation. And Vairagya, Viveka, all these things will all come on their own if you do meditation, cleaning, and prayer with the aid of pranahuti. And this is what he says. He says, Lalaji changed the whole scene here in spirituality when he rediscovered pranahuti. Because before that, it was arduous. Because most people couldn't sit and meditate and interiorize, go to their center. Whereas we're given this in every meditation. And if preceptors are doing their introductions correctly, they first clean, then they awaken the light in the heart, and then they connect that with the master's heart. Once that connection is made, then every time that person sits for meditation and cleaning and invokes the presence of the master, transmission will flow. Whether they feel it or not is another thing. But we know it happens. This is the science of reality that, is a revolution in modern times in spirituality. So it is simple. Not that you don't go through challenges. It'll be the most difficult thing you'll ever do in your life, for sure. But it's simple in the sense that what we have to do is sit in meditation, sit in cleaning, sit in prayer every day, work on our character, to refine that, to reflect what's going on in the inside. And the master does the rest. The master does all the heavy lifting. I mean, you can't get simpler than that as a spiritual system. It's the essence of everything in a nutshell. And, you know, they keep saying, when people say, can we get rid of this, or can we not do that part, or what happens if I don't do the prayer? And Daji's comment is, well, this is the shortcut. It really is the shortcut. It's going up in the lift to the 30th floor instead of walking up the stairs. I mean, that's what they give us. We try to find ways around that to minimize, and especially when our practice becomes mechanical. So what happens when it becomes mechanical? We need to do something to reinvigorate ourselves, re-enthuse ourselves. You know, Charity was always talking about enthusiasm coming from the word theos, the Greek word theos, meaning God. And it just means that some coverings are come back on, or we're going through that Barzak state between the chakras where we just feel lost in limbo. We know all this stuff. We're a community organization. We're not individuals who work alone. The beauty of heartfulness is that when we struggle, we have other people to turn to. I struggle all the time. You know, I'll have great days, I'll have fantastic meditations, and then I'll have a period where I'm just really wonky and I think, oh, here we go again. And it's sort of inevitable, because if you're out in the world, you're in different environments, you'll be affected by them. You're going through your own evolution, you're working on your character, you see stuff that you just think, oh, not again. You know, when is this idiotic trait going to leave me? And, you know, all that stuff. And we have worries about our loved ones. You know, we're human beings as well. And the masters point that out all the time, including Daji in this book. So it's not that we run away from that stuff. But, you know, our job is to come back to the simplicity of what we've been given. We're all connected with the master. As preceptors, every time we give a sitting, we know that it's master who's giving the sitting. All these things, we talk about them all the time. Do we really, really believe them? Because if we do, every time we sit for cleaning, we know the cleaning works because we're connected with the master. If somebody's not been introduced properly, the cleaning won't work well, because it's that connection that makes the whole thing work. It's the master that does the heavy lifting, the pranahuti that does the heavy lifting. If we can understand this, then everything is simple. Even the challenges we go through start to become simple, because it's like what you said before about the Ds in the heart region. If something happens and I've got to deal with a challenge and I get angry or I'm grieving or whatever, how am I going to work with this? How am I going to use this for my benefit? How am I going to use what practice is needed in this moment to help me in this? We have all the toolkit. We have so much at our disposal to use. And we have a master who's saying, you just sit with your eyes closed and I'll do the rest. I mean, what can be simpler than that?
Yes. I think we just don't believe that it is so simple. And I think you've brought it wonderfully in the last page, page 196, which talks about realization is simple. And I'm just going to read out Babuji's concept of what that simplicity is. And he has just these lines for us. I appreciate my associates. Proceed toward the unknown. Love him who loves all. Destination is not far off. Remembrance is the instrument. Bless you all. I think I cannot imagine anything simpler, anything more wonderful than this, to have the confidence that we have everything that we need to go towards the destination. And I think he does qualify it by saying, proceed towards the unknown, which again encompasses your concept of belief, that don't believe that you know what it is that you are going towards. You are not going to carry anything, proceed towards the unknown. I think this encapsulates the entire book, and it's a tribute to all the masters to have given us this. I am mindful of time. We are about 5 minutes away from our contracted 1 hour of talk, and we've hardly covered, I would think, 5 to 6% of all that is there in this wonderful book. What I will ask, maybe with the permission of everyone here, the one last question that we are all very keen to know, because you must have spent so much time with Daji doing this. Is there any personal anecdote or an experience that you can share with all of us, which kind of made this book come out in the way it has? Something that we'll all feel happy to hear from you.
I think being with him, watching his evolution, I was blessed enough to move to Manapakam in 2011. And soon after, he was announced as Charaji's successor. And then a period ensued of, up till December 2014, where one master training another. And because we were working on books, on Babaji's volumes, on the Whispers, 1944 to 55, etc., I was always there with one or other of them reading and getting, Daji's style is to dictate. I would write it all down, look at grammar and all that sort of stuff, go back and read back to him, and then he would add some more, that sort of style. Of course, he does it slightly differently now with AI, but, that was his way back then. And so it meant a lot of personal time with him where, we were reading the books of Babaji, the diaries of Babaji, and then he would give his inputs. And seeing his absolute, I don't know how, I can't put it into words, but the sense of awe, the sense of humility with which he would approach his masters, the willingness to always learn, and the willingness to always look at things from different perspectives. When he'd struggle with something, the refinement in his process of struggling. And I remember asking him, the first time I saw him after he was nominated as the successor, and it was in Manapakam in the cottage, and we were just sitting and there were people milling around everywhere, and it was possible to have a quiet moment. And I asked him, how do you feel about this responsibility? And his answer was, how I see him. He just said, why should I worry? They're there. And for me, that's Daji, that's his. And because of that, and for those of you who've read A Symphony of Love, the Book of the Whispers, the recent one that came out, the Book of the Whispers of the special sittings that Daji gave to Mama Helen from 2012 to 2017. There you also see his evolution. In the beginning, he's not able to partake in those conversations. It starts with just Babaji and Mama Helen, and then Lalaji gets involved. Swami Vivekananda gets involved. Charaji's spiritual entity gets involved because Charaji's still alive at that stage. And finally, Daji's spiritual entity gets involved. And the first few times it does, they're just one sentence or one phrase. And then over the rest of the book, you see that they expand and he's able to join the conversation like the others. 2 or 3 paragraphs, and Lalaji's praising him, saying, look, look how Kamlesh is coming on, look how he's developing. So this development was in multiple dimensions, obviously, many which, we didn't see. I'm sure many more which we didn't see. But even in this dimension, when you see this master now today and you look at his being and his softness, and if you think about what realization personifies in a human being, just look at him, sit with him, not even with eyes open, with eyes closed, and feel the being, and you will know what it's all about, and you will know why we do this. Because when you're with that level, I mean, greatness is a funny word to use because it's such a humble and such a insignificant condition. To use the word greatness sounds ridiculous, but when you're in the presence of that, then you understand what the human potential is on all levels. And I think that's what we're all striving for. I think to doubt what they're telling us, to doubt what the masters are telling us, that God realization is simple, is just wasting their time. They've told us it's simple. They're giving it to us. We just have the minimum to do. I'm sure they just are waiting for us to get on with it, to be honest.
I know. No, it's such a wonderful answer that you've given us all, which, is a very significant thing for the confidence that we need to have to believe that, yes, it is simple, and thus we don't need anything apart from what they have already given us to go on that path. I really want to thank you for, being available for all of us. There was a request that, all of us can ask you questions, the opportunity that I got to, but obviously not all questions could be answered or even asked in a format like that. But if at all, you would be happy to take some of these questions at a later time, I'm sure our members would like to, bring some specific questions which we could, share with you, and maybe you could give us your answers to that. But
Sure.
that's been, something which has been phenomenal for me. And you asked me the question the last time that we talked, is that have I read the book? And I said yes. But that is, now I understand, is just the first reading. That is nothing to do with having read it. And all of this conversation gives me even more confidence that there is much more in the book than I thought that I did when I read the book. I'm now going to hand it over to Priya to do the needful, to thank everyone and to close this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Tushar. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I have forgotten actually what I wanted to say because I was transported to some nice warm fireplace, sitting quietly and listening, and just in another zone. So, but yes, like Tushar bhai said, when I read the first chapter of The Starting Point, I thought I had left that far behind, the religion and the beliefs and the science behind it. And what I realized today is that I have a starting point each morning when I start to meditate. And that's my starting point from there. So just from that, and, there are so many things in this 55 minutes that we have spoken about. So I'm sure as we read the book, it's the work of a lifetime. The even smallest thing of not being on the C or D, but narrowing the oscillations. It's a refreshing lens to look at my everyday life as we live it. So deeply grateful. Thank you so much. And we have to come back to the mundane things. So I'd just like to share a small slide as to how we can contribute to, spreading this message. Each one of us here today, spreading this message of clarity and wisdom to as many hearts as we can. So I'll just take a moment not more than that. It's self-explanatory, but let's just go through it. And first and foremost, there is a request that we share our feedback of the book on Amazon, each one of us, because it goes a long way in letting everyone know how deeply it impacts all of us. So please do go online and share your feedback on the book. We've initiated book reading sessions in some of the places here in Mumbai. So if you want to initiate one or join the book reading sessions, please do get in touch. We also have formats that we can reuse to get a head start. We don't have to, break our heads over how to do it. So if you want to it's lovely when people come together and read a page. It is so different than reading a page by yourself at home because it gives us so much more to work with. So that's one of the things we can immediately start. Events, of course, there's World Meditation Day coming up on 21st December. So we can organize events around it in clubs, organizations, schools, wherever you feel there is a presence where you can connect with. And, we can call either our ambassadors or anyone else that you know that will help with an event and a book launch. We can organize for that. If you have in your network any influencers that can help promote the book on social media, we can do that also. Gifting the book, and any other creative ideas that you may have that are beyond this, please do share with us and, we'll keep the message going. So keep in touch. And like Tushar bhai said, hopefully we'll have another session where we read the book and come back with more questions and insights. Thank you, Elizabeth, so much. It was lovely, wonderful. And I'd also like to thank Sister Anjali, Mukesh bhai, Supriya for helping in the background, being in the background. But thank you for your love and support. Thank you so much.